another attempt to turn a popular video game franchise into a popular movie franchise. It's become one of those tired cliches in Hollywood that video games are just really hard to adapt into movies. And, but I don't think anyone's ever asked the question, why is that? Why is it so hard to do? And I developed a theory for myself while watching this movie because I was so incredibly bored. I had to do something to keep from falling asleep. And the theory goes like this. In the early days of gaming, like back in the classic, the heyday, the Nintendo, the original Nintendo Entertainment System days, the video games were very light on plot. They had them, that was one of the big revolutionary things stepping up from, the old Atari days, is that they weren't just, Pac-Man goes around and tries to eat pellets. They had a little bit more going on in them, but they were still fairly open-ended. You could do a lot with them. Until the cartoon series came along, like Super Mario had no discernible personality. Link had no discernible personality. The Double Dragon guys, whatever the fuck their names were, had no discernible personalities. They were the hero. They were rescuing the damsel, saving, fill in the blank from villain whatever. And that was it. Fairly universal, easy to understand. I mean, it was there to appeal to kids, for God's sakes. These were not, deep thinking pieces. So you would think that would make it very easy to interpret into movies. You have a basic premise that's fairly universal, and you can do a lot with that. But in the early days, these films, or these stories took place in very colorful, very bright, very detailed worlds. And those were very difficult to recreate, one, on 90s special effects, and two, on the budgets that someone was willing to spend for a video game movie. You've got to remember, back in the day, video games and comic books were not the cultural powerhouses they are now. No movie studio was going to shell out the big bucks for name brand talent and, Star Wars level special effects to make a movie about a video game. That just wasn't going to happen. And that's where you get things like, Super Mario Brothers, of the 90s film, I mean. Charming in its way, but let's face it, it never is going to make anybody's top 10 list. Now, we have kind of the opposite problem. Video games have evolved to such a point where they are essentially, movies in and of themselves. The technology has caught up where you can make a movie with, the colorful backgrounds and all of the, the colorful characters. It's conceivable to do, but the problem is the video games themselves have evolved to such a point where they already are movies. And when so there's basically nothing you can do with them that the video game itself hasn't already done. And if you're going to make a movie out of something, you're going to transfer something from one medium to another. You're doing so because that other medium offers you a chance to see this property realized in a new light. That's why, adapting a book into a movie has worked so well, because you actually get to see the characters and the worlds in live action. Even though that doesn't work a lot of the times, doing live action remakes of animated films makes a little bit of sense. You get to see this again realized with live actors. But the video game is already a movie in and of itself, and especially the Uncharted series. The Uncharted series basically are playable movies. That's one of the things they were sold on, is how cinematic they were. And so basically, first of all, you have a problem of where do you go with that? There's nothing you can do with that premise that the video game hasn't already done. You have to tell a completely new story. And the other problem is you lose that audience connection when you take it out of an interactive medium and place it into a strictly passive one. Part of what makes the Uncharted series so much fun as a player is that you feel like it is you dangling off of that plane, or being chased by that boulder, or being, hunted by mercenaries, or all these great set pieces that the Uncharted game series was best known for. You really feel like it's you doing it. Yes, you're playing Nathan Drake, but it's you. And you remove that attachment, and it can't live up. Watching someone else do it is not as much fun as doing it yourself. Sword Art Online had it. It's one of the best lines from that show. Nothing's more boring than watching someone play an RPG. And I think that's where the problem of this comes from is, it's not as much fun watching Tom Holland do these things as it is playing the game and doing them yourselves and feeling like it's you doing them. And I think that has been kind of the quagmire video game movies have been stuck in, is you're basically all, back in the day, you had the open-ended element where you could expand on these worlds, but you didn't have the money or the drive or the time to do it. Now you do, but the video games themselves have already expanded on the worlds and given you, visceral immediacy, and making a movie just kind of numbs the experience. And that's a long way around for me to basically say this movie was just dull to me. And I wanted to like it. I really did, because there's a lot of elements going on in it that I really enjoy. I enjoy the Uncharted series. I won't say I love the Uncharted series, but I enjoyed it. They were fun games. The main thing I hated about them is that, you could shoot a bad guy 500 times and it takes forever for him to die. He shoots you once and you're gone. So that's a player nitpick. But on the whole, the games are fun. The set pieces are always really exhilarating. It's one of those things where they did the set piece first and then figured out the script around it, which shows sometimes. And Nathan Drake was a fun enough, early 2000s, quote-unquote everyman. He had just enough character to make him interesting, but he was bland enough that you could insert yourself into his world. That's another thing that make video games hard to translate, is the lead characters are very, very difficult, because you've got to make them interesting enough to carry the story, but also blank enough that the audience can see themselves in it. This is what made James Bond so popular back in the day. He had just enough distinguishing characteristics to make him an understandable character. Indiana Jones as well is the same way. That just enough about them that they are individuals and their characters are very distinct. But especially with Bond, until these recent Daniel Craig films, you knew very little about who he was as a person, because if you did, that makes it harder for you to identify as him. And so that means you have to try to fill in Nathan Drake. And I'm sorry, I think one of the big problems with this movie is the casting. The biggest problem I had with this movie, aside from the fact it was just dull, was the casting. And I love Tom Holland. I need to put that right out there now. Tom Holland's awesome. I thought he was an outstanding Spider-Man, even though he only did one really great Spider-Man movie, but he was really good in the role. And that's the type of role that Tom Holland plays very well. Nathan Drake is not in Tom Holland's wheelhouse. This film is so woefully miscast. It is staggering how miscast this film is, especially when you consider that Nathan Drake was the archetypal character of so many Hollywood leading men. I mean, when they were first talking about making this film, Nathan Fillion was one of the names on the list to play Nathan Drake, and I can see that. Tom Holland is not Nathan Drake. Ryan Reynolds is Nathan Drake. As tiring as I find Ryan Reynolds, Nathan Drake is the Ryan Reynolds archetype. It really is. Or, if you want to really know the tragic irony of all of this, you know who else is more Nathan Drake? Mark Wahlberg. Mark Wahlberg would have made a great Nathan Drake. A matter of fact, it feels like half the time in this movie, he should be playing Nathan Drake. He basically is doing Nathan Drake's shtick, more so than Tom Holland is. Tom Holland is wearing the costume. Tom Holland looks like he's cosplaying. That is what Tom Holland looks like he's doing in this movie. He looks like he's cosplaying as Nathan Drake, whereas Mark Wahlberg is actually playing Nathan Drake. And because of that, everything else in the film is thrown off. Because obviously, if he's playing Nathan Drake, then who's playing Sully? Sully should have been played by a much older actor. And yeah, so right there's your problem. There is the biggest problem of this movie. It's all thrown off. I think if Mark Wahlberg had been playing Nathan Drake, and you had I don't know. Let's see. I'll throw a Rainn Wilson. Rainn Wilson would have made a good Sully. He's not as old as he should be. I think he's actually not. He's probably around the same age as Mark Wahlberg. But I think Rainn Wilson could have played Sully fairly well. Or you get any number of gruff older actors. They're out there. You got them by the ton. You know, if one of them had been playing Sully to Mark Wahlberg's Nathan Drake, this might have worked. I think it might have worked. But the whole time I'm watching Tom Holland, I'm just going, yeah, he looks good in the fight scenes. He's wiry. He's flipping around. But I'm watching him going, he's playing his Peter Parker. That's essentially who he's playing. He's not playing Nathan Drake. He's playing Peter Parker, playing Uncharted. If the post-credit sequence had zoomed out and shown that this was Peter Parker after the events of No Way Home, playing the video game Uncharted all by himself, being lonely after the events of No Way Home, and so he's envisioning himself as Nathan Drake, I would have given this movie an A+. Totally would have. That's what they should have done. Kind of a cross between, Free Guy and I don't know what else. But, I would have given this an A+ if they had pulled that shit. Matter of fact, maybe it'll work better if I think of it in those terms. So right away, so the casting is off, and it just throws everything out of whack. Everything is just out of balance for the whole rest of the picture. So again, if you're going to take a video game series and transfer it to film, it means it's gonna have to have something unique about it. It already feels way too much like the lost sequel to National Treasure, because that's essentially what the Uncharted games were. That's not a ripoff. That's what the Uncharted games were mimicking in a lot of ways. So it already feels like we're making a cheap knockoff of that. So you got to find something to give the movie its own flavor. And of course, what the Uncharted games were known for were those big action set pieces. Dangling off of a ledge, or falling out of the plane, or chase scenes in crazy places. Those were their bread and butter. And this film tries really hard to recreate that. You see it in the trailers, him dangling out of the cargo plane. A fight scene that was done way better in the Timothy Dalton Bond film, Living Daylights. The best thing I can say about that scene, the scene in this movie, is that it really did look like a video game. And I mean that because the CGI got kind of flat at several points. They have the big action set piece at the end where they're having battles in the 2 ancient Spanish sailing ships being flown through the air by helicopters, and that sounds like it should be a fun and interesting setup, and it's just not. It's just not. I'm sorry. Maybe, I don't know if I'm just too tired or if, the casting thing really threw me, but I know I should have been enjoying it, and I really, really wasn't. It also has a lot of the other cliches of films like this. This film, that's it. This film is the bastard offspring of a National Treasure movie and one of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, in the way that everybody is literally betraying everyone else at every given fucking turn. Everybody does a heel turn in this, just like Jack Sparrow was doing in the later Pirates movies, which got so tiring. It's like, oh, he's heel turning on this. Oh, he's heel turning now. Oh, he's turned on that person. Who's going to betray who now? It was funny when they did it in the first Pirates movie, and it was great when they did it on Game of Thrones. But, eventually, walking through the betrayal garden just gets tiring. It's not to say the games didn't do it. I know Sully portrayed him in, I think, the first game a couple times, so it's not like it's out of nowhere for the franchise, but still, it's like, okay, everyone's out for themselves, and then someone's gonna, at the end, Sully's gonna put Nathan first, and this movie is, again, this is Sully's movie. This is not a Nathan Drake origin story like they're trying to sell it. This is Sully's story. He has the character arc. He grows. He changes. Nathan doesn't really. It's Mark Wahlberg's movie. Just make him fucking Nathan Drake. I don't say make him fuck Nathan Drake. You save that for your fan fiction. No, I'm just make him Nathan Drake, for God's sakes. It would have made everything a lot easier. I will say, in terms of the betrayal, one thing I did kind of like, is that it does keep the Uncharted trope of having a main villain you introduce as the main villain, and then they get whacked by one of their henchmen, and that henchman becomes the main villain. It had Antonio Banderas in it for like 10 minutes, which was interesting. But, he's basically in there just to be a red herring bad guy till the henchman becomes the bad guy. And, she did a pretty good job. I'll admit that. But, yeah, there just wasn't enough in here. It's not a bad movie, really. It's passable. It's a decent popcorn flick. In terms of video game movies, it falls in there with kind of the Rampage, the Rock film, the first Sonic the Hedgehog, movies that are watchable, but ultimately very forgettable. And you have more fun just playing the damn video game. And God, they do 2 post-credit scenes to set up more sequels. Dear God, please don't let this have sequels, but I know it's going to, because it was very popular. And I swear the post-credit sequence was basically another movie. You're like, okay, are we wrapping this up? And if I had my will, if I could work my will, this post-credit sequence would forever be hanging, not unlike the post-credit sequence from Super Mario Brothers back in the 90s. I just do not want to see any more of these, but maybe they'll get it a little bit better. Maybe they got the origin story out of the way, and if they do another one of these, which they will, maybe that one will have a little bit more on the bone, and I can enjoy it more, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So let's do this. Let's wrap this up. So final grade for Uncharted. I'm going just a C. I almost want to say a C- because I was bored so much, but the action scenes are decently staged. Tom Holland is still a very commanding presence. He and Mark Wahlberg do have a decent chemistry, even though it is not the chemistry the characters should have. And some of the locations are really pretty. So all in all, it's an okay night out movie, but it's nothing special. And again, we'll get sequels, but you're going to forget this movie existed, or you're going to forget anything that happened in it, 20 minutes after you've seen it. It's gonna go into obscurity. It's never going to have much of a shelf life. So yeah, so I'm going to see on this one. All right, so there you have it. That's Uncharted. So yeah, so that's all I've really got to say on this one. I'm really tired. I'm going to go home and go to bed. But thank you all for joining me, and we will be back trying to wrap up birthday week at the movies. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.